Do you ever feel like you just don't have the time to sit down and read the news every morning? Sometimes things get so hectic you can't even scroll through your feeds while you're trying to get ready. A new podcast from Boise State Public Radio has you covered. I'm George Prentice, and I want to invite you to check out The Connector every weekday morning. You can get up to speed on all of the Idaho news you need to start your day without ever interrupting your morning routine. All you have to do is hit play. That's The Connector from Boise State Public Radio. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. The new year marked an unwelcome milestone for Idaho. We learned of a second case of chronic wasting disease in domestic elk here in the Gem State. CWD is still a rare disease, but it's already spread to 35 states and 5 Canadian provinces. Now, this illness can be devastating to animals in the wild, and the Idaho Fish and Game Department has been working with hunters to try and track the disease. So, what is CWD, and how does it spread, and what is Idaho doing to fight it? Well, to answer those questions, we asked Roger Phillips, Public Information Supervisor with Idaho Fish and Game, and Stacy Dewalter, Fish and Game's Wildlife Health Program Coordinator, to help us out. I want to welcome both of you to the program.
Thank you, Gemma.
Stacy, let me begin the conversation with you. Can you tell us what chronic wasting disease is? Because my understanding is it is not a virus.
Correct. Chronic wasting disease is actually caused by a protein. The protein is mutated. So it's not a bacteria, it's not a virus, it's not a fungi. It is something that the body recognizes as being a normal protein. So the body does not have an immune response to it. It cannot break it down. And unfortunately, the misfolding or the mutated shape of the prion makes it very hard to break down on its own.
So, Stacy, how then does it impact animals? And what animals can be impacted by it?
So there's different prion diseases. The one we're interested in is chronic wasting disease, and it affects cervids in Idaho. So cervids are our deer, elk, and moose. And if we had a population of caribou, it could potentially affect them as well. So being that the prion doesn't break down, once an animal is infected with it, it continues to build up in the animal's body, targeting the nervous system, so spinal fluid, spinal column to the brain. And there it kind of lays down and builds kind of like a group of what are called fibrils. But essentially it's kind of like a plaque. So when we hear descriptions of issues like Alzheimer's and stuff like that. Anytime there's a plaque that builds up in the brain, the brain no longer functions like it's supposed to. So that's essentially what the prion that causes chronic wasting disease does. It lays down and builds to cause plaques that causes essentially neurodegeneration in these animals.
So, Roger, when was CWD first found here in Idaho, and where was it found?
Yeah, it was first discovered in 2021 in two wild mule deer bucks that were harvested near Riggins. And since then, we have had other cases pop up near New Meadows. And last summer, we had some in the Panhandle as well. And as an agency, we've been monitoring for it since 1997. So this is a fairly recent phenomenon of seeing it here in the state. And ultimately, our goal is to slow or prevent the spread of CWD within Idaho, because it will negatively affect our deer populations and our hunting opportunities potentially in the future.
So, Roger, it has just been in the past couple of months that chronic wasting disease was found in domestic cow elk here in Idaho. Talk to us about why this is significant. So versus it being found in wild elk, it is now in domestic elk. And I guess for people who aren't familiar, what are domestic elk?
Well, a couple of things. That's more of a Department of Agriculture situation, and obviously these are elk that are owned by individuals, and they are kept in captive facilities, so treated more like livestock, and so they're managing those are significantly different than managing wild herds, and we deal with the wild herds, not the captive elk.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, the Idaho Department of Agriculture deals with basically, I guess, elk farms, and so they have
Yes.
found these two cases in domestic elk. All right, so how concerned though, even though I understand that your department does not have agency over these domestic elk, but that should we be concerned that it has been found in domestic elk as well?
Well, certainly should be concerned. And like I say, the management of those domestic elk is considerably different than in wild herds, which are migratory. And those are the things that we really pay attention to. And where kind of the nexus here is, when we are doing our testing, we will kind of ramp up testing in that same vicinity where those domestic elk were found. So that if there are any wild animals that have the disease, hopefully we'll be able to discover if those have occurred.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, Stacy, is there any treatment for this disease?
There isn't. So being that it is, again, something that the body recognizes, there's no immune response. And right now there's no vaccine, and there's no treatment. The prion, even outside of a biological, the animal, if it were to be found in the environment, it's extremely resilient and it doesn't break down. So once a prion is in an area, whether it's in the population or it's in the environment, it's kind of there to stay. There's very little we can do, especially in the wild, to mitigate that prion and spreading it.
So, Roger, I understand that Fish and Game has been working with hunters to try and find and track chronic wasting disease. Can you talk about this program and how it works? And I am assuming when you're working with hunters, you're talking about the wild elk, and this is the part where Idaho Fish and Game oversees this aspect.
That is correct. And yeah, we rely on hunters. There's no live test for CWD for wild animals. And so what we do our testing on is obviously dead animals, and those are typically hunter harvested, and also road kills, or if we find an animal dead that we suspect we will test that as well. We get thousands of samples from hunters every year. We could not do this without them. We really appreciate their cooperation, and they're really kind of the guiding force in this because not only do they help us understand where this is, they, work with us on how we treat these matters when we find CWD in wild herds and what management actions we will take.
Mm-hmm. Roger, how have hunters been with this program? Are they embracing this program and willing to work with your department?
Yeah, they really have. And I mean, part of this is, to be for 100% clarity, is some of this is mandatory. When we decide that we need tests in a certain area, we can mandate that. And they've been very cooperative of that, but also statewide. And it's kind of a twofold thing. It provides hunters with the safety of knowing that their animals are test negatively for it. It's a free test that we provide. We provide them the opportunity to learn whether their animal tested positive or a negative. And then if one tests positive, then we know we can find out down to, the exact location of where that animal was taken. And then we can, form our management accordingly.
So, Stacy, I'm curious. Even if you're not a hunter, maybe you're someone who's a wildlife watcher, right? And you're out in nature and maybe you see wild elk. Are there certain things folks should be looking for? I mean, can you tell by looking at an elk if they have CWD?
No, not just by looking.
Okay.
Animals in the later stages of the disease will start to have the neurodegenerative the neurogeneration or degeneration of you know, their faculties. So animals that are in the later stages of the disease, they will start to become unaware of their surroundings. They won't eat. They'll show some general confusion and maybe lack of fear. However, any animal could be living with this disease for, a year or two without showing any signs or, any indication that they are sick from anything. So it is not something that's as simple as, an animal being in good condition when harvested or hit by a car. So it's a little hard to, across the board say there's a real easy way to determine if an animal has CWD or not by visually looking at an animal.
And Stacy, what do you see as the future of this disease? I mean, is it here to stay in Idaho?
Unfortunately, that's what it's looking like right now. There's a lot of research on prion disease in general worldwide, and then specifically with chronic wasting disease, there's university and research agencies across the United States that are tackling this problem right now with better methods of detecting the prion, figuring out where it's at, trying to figure out what an infectious dose is, and also working on, possible ways to either develop a vaccine or find ways to break down the prion. It was only in October of this year that a paper came out that was able to provide a description on what a prion looks like and how it builds the fibrils and what that looks like. And that's going to go a long way to help development of possible CWD vaccines and therapeutics. We're just not there yet. So unfortunately, the way the disease has progressed across the United States, no one's been successful in eradicating it from tiny small populations possible. In Idaho, not Idaho, New York, previous to the most recent detection in New York. It was found in, I think, a game farm, and they were able to depopulate. But once it's here, unfortunately, what we're looking at is management through animal populations. We can't necessarily manage the disease itself.
But there's only so much you can do, Roger, right? I mean, in regards to the fact that your department only manages wild elk, and yet we've now seen 2 cases in domestic elk. And that's a completely different department here in Idaho. And they may be managing this completely differently than how you are managing the wild elk.
Yeah, that's correct. And to clarify, we have found, I believe, and Stacy can correct me if I'm wrong, we've only found 1 instance of a CWD positive elk. This is more of a wild deer issue in Idaho. And elk can contract it, but they seem to contract it less than deer do. So we're really focused on the deer side of it. And yeah, you're 100% correct. These are wild, free roaming animals. And in our mule deer populations, they often migrate, they might go 50 miles a year. So it's not just one location that we can look at and go, okay, we need to address this right here in this spot, especially with mule deer, because they're seasonally moving throughout the state. And so it's a pretty challenging one, but we also know some of our neighboring states have been dealing with it for decades. It tends to be a slow progressing disease on a population level. But the more we know, we can put our prescriptions in place to slow or prevent the spread of the disease throughout Idaho.
Can you, Stacy, eat one of these animals if they have chronic wasting disease, or should you avoid doing that?
Well, as a game agency, we're very careful in not offering, human health guidance. We do refer all of our hunters or those interested in whether or not they should eat prion infected game or any other meat to human health agencies. Right now, the CDC is the agency that we're directing people to. Their recommendation is not to eat any meat or parts of an animal that contain a prion disease, whether it's CWD or something else. So we have no regulation over our hunters on whether they can consume the meat or not. We do help them if they make the decision to dispose of meat. We help do that safely. But we do ask our hunters that if they have questions about human safety, that they talk to either their personal physician, their doctor, or contact human health agencies.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming in today and talking with us about this. Really appreciate it. We've been speaking with Roger Phillips, Public Information Supervisor with Idaho Fish and Game, along with Stacy Dewalter, Fish and Game's Wildlife Health Program Coordinator, discussing chronic wasting disease here in Idaho. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
If you like podcasts like this, explore more from the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. There you'll find a mix of daily news, Idaho Voices, and in-depth series on a wide range of topics. I'm talking wild horses, political scandals, sustainable ranching, and militia groups in a post-January 6th world. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Boise State Public Radio to find what Idaho's NPR station has in store for you.